Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Rebecca, how are you on this early Pacific time morning?
I'm good. I have a friend who posted this week that 4 a.m. in Philadelphia is 6 a.m. in Arizona. So she was all at 4 a.m. doing a morning show. I'm like, oh, 6 is like cushy. I can
Yeah,
handle
I've,
this.
I've, not that this is anything about what we're talking about, but I've come to realize that you can't get sucked into the people who are like the 3, 4, 5 a.m.ers. Like, we're just designed differently, man. Like, I follow some business people and they're like, I'm up at 4 every morning working out, and then I do this for 5 hours. I'm like, bro, that's not me. I'm not waking up at
No.
4 o'clock in the morning to do it. Like, I worked on the clinic till like 7 or 8 sometimes, and I want to have an hour to like do that and go to bed. And I got like 8 hours last night, and I probably woke up at like 6:30, and I was like, all right, this is good. This is good.
It just doesn't make sense to me. I have little kids and I've always been like, no, 6 a.m. is the night still, kiddo.
Mm,
Like we're not getting up. I am not a morning person. Luckily, none of my family are. So we're all on the same page about
yeah.
weekends. We sleep.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
I like to think that I've met a lot of people who are equally as productive, successful, doing well, and they get up at 6 or 6:30 and they're just fine. Like I think it's more about what you do with the other 18 hours than, what you do for those 8 hours of when you sleep, whether it's 10 to 6 or 11 to 7. My brother is like the ultimate night owl and he wakes up at like 9. He's fine. He's good. No big deal.
Yep. I know it well, and I've interviewed this sleep expert who's like, it
Yes.
doesn't everyone's different. You got the morning birds, you got the
Yeah.
night owls, and it's like it's legit, like your whole life you sort of fall into that pattern. So
Yeah.
it just goes back to comparing yourself to others and being like, well, should I be doing
For
what
sure.
they're doing?
For
Well,
sure.
no, not if it doesn't work for you. For me, I'm like peak productivity at 2:30 p.m.,
Interesting.
which is
Oh
so
my God.
random.
That's
Like
wild.
that's the time when things flow out of me is 2:30 p.m.
That's really cool. I guess that self-awareness is important, right? Like, I'm like I'm really, really good from like, I was like 7 to 11 or 8 to 11 if I have a good night to sleep and I have an hour to myself to like read or journal or do whatever I want. But then I'm like, if I get a good playlist and like a good environment and a cup of coffee, I'm like on fire for 4 hours. But then I find that in the afternoon, I'm not good with academic or like, like writing work or work like for shift, but I'm very good with people. Like the afternoon is like, I see all my patients from like 12 to 7 or like 11 to 6 because I'm more relaxed. Then I've got all my stuff done. I don't feel like anxious about what I have to get do, but I'm like, very just casual. And I can like be very empathetic in the afternoon. So when I was coaching and stuff, I would always like do very, very well in afternoon practice, but morning practice, I was like, I have so much to do. Like I have so much crap I have to get done. But yeah, that self-awareness is key, I guess, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, you just set yourself up for success. That's like all mental training is finding your own personal patterns.
Yes,
Like what
absolutely.
works for you. There is no one size fits all. It makes me crazy when coaches are like, everyone sit and visualize for
Mm,
3 minutes and this will help your beam routine. I'm like, well, unless you're terrible at focusing, you have
yeah.
ADHD, you don't know how to do imagery, you know. So you sit there and you just like squirrel around in your mind and then you're like, did I do it wrong? I did it wrong. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Mm,
It's like you have to meet the kids where they are and figure out, okay, well,
mm,
what actually does help that kid based on results that they've already had. You scan back through the successes and go, well, what'd you do? And
mm.
that's the best way to figure it out rather than like, here's a prescription for all 12 of you.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's something I didn't have on our list of things to talk about, but it's probably organic here, which is I have found that with gymnastics in particular, around mental blocks and fear and things like that, we'll get into, is like it's so context specific about what some people are triggered by and other people are not. And I think like in the real world and my friends and trying to help each other out, I find that's very very common as well, which is, Eva, who's been on the podcast. She's one of my best friends. I love her to death. And she's okay with me talking about this. We have a lot of like personal life talks around like what really is triggering for our anxiety or like gets us in a depressive state or what's hard for her. Like it's things around like her family and for budgeting and for finance. She has 2 young kids, right? Like, so she's very, anxious about that kind of aspect of the financial things. Whereas I live in an apartment. I have no kids. I'm by myself right now. Like I'm like dating people, but it's not money's like an essential to our relationship. Right. So like I have zero qualms around like, I'll just like spend less and save more. Like, I'm like, I just won't buy that. Like for her, that's hard. But for me, like personal relationships and family and like social interactions on a business point of view, I could talk to 3,000 people right now about gymnastic stuff and literally not prepare a single slide and just talk off the cuff for an hour and a half. But when it comes to terms of like one-on-one personal discussions or things with my family or people like, dating relationships, those are really sometimes challenging for me. And it's wild how like for Eva, she has zero problem with that at all. None. Doesn't even like blink an eye. But for me, that's very triggering. And I go back to gymnastics, which is for some athletes that I've worked with, the actual event or the actual skill or the actual motion of going backwards is terrifying for them, right? But anything forward or anything on bars or anything on vault is like not even a problem. For other people, nothing in practice is problematic, but it's like a meltdown in competition because they've done all the skills, but as soon as they raise their hand, their world implodes. So it's a long story, but can you maybe just share about the context specific nature? Because I think it's hard for people to understand why someone is struggling with a mental block or fear when they don't understand from an empathetic point of view. Like, I don't really get why you're fearful about that, you know?
Yes. So, I mean, it's biological.
Mm,
It's not rational. It doesn't make sense. I have worked with kids who haven't done a round off back handspring in 3 years because that connection from the round off to the back handspring is so, fraught,
mm,
so scary, but they can do a Yurchenko vault, which is
mm.
literally the exact same skill on a harder surface. And I talk to families too, who these moms are just, or these coaches are like, she can do it on a mat. You take the mat away, she can't do it. She can do it when the coach puts their hand
Pinky spot.
6 inches away, the magic one finger spot. She can do it.
Mm,
But then she completely seizes up when that coach takes a 6-inch step back.
yeah.
Why? And it's biological. So I explain it to kids like this. When you touch a hot stove as a kid, you burn your hand and your brain registers that's not safe. So the next time you're walking by a stove and you don't realize you're about to touch it, the moment your brain registers that stove, it's going to freeze you up so that
Right.
you don't touch it. If you were walking off a cliff, you didn't realize it. The moment you look over the edge, you freeze because your brain goes, not safe. And that's
Mm,
its job, to immediately freeze you up because it has sensed a threat.
sure. Sure.
So if you have, if you have had that sensation of I'm not safe and
Mm,
you've bailed out of the skill, or a lot of the times a kid will have been tumbling and then someone runs behind on the floor and they
mm,
go like, that was unexpected. So their
right.
brain goes, not safe.
Right.
Or they have linked that skill to, if you don't get this skill, you don't move up. Not safe. I won't be with my friends. There's so many things in an adolescent's brain that cause these perceived threats. A lot of them are
Right.
social. They might have messed up and felt really embarrassed, so their brain goes not safe.
Mm,
So, they'll come to me and go, well, I don't even feel scared. I don't even know what's going on. My brain, I just can't get my body to do it because the brain has decided that there's a threat and has gone
mm,
into overprotective mode.
yes.
So
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Go ahead.
they
Sorry.
like, yeah, no, then their coach is like, well, just do it. But
Yeah.
it doesn't work. Me on a beam, I'd put my hands up and I'd be like, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. I'm ready. I got this. I got this. And I'd swing my arms and just thud. It was like,
Mm,
there was a brick wall behind me and I physically couldn't make my body do it, which was
right.
so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so many very important points that you highlighted there that I want to kind of maybe dig into more, a couple layers. One is that Carly Dockendorf came on from Utah a few months ago, and she had horrible mental blocks when she was a gymnast, like horrible. And she said it was really debilitating in her career. And she's something that we talked about that really resonated, like to the point where like we had a couple of viral posts and I had about 50 to 100 DMs and emails, was that mental blocks are not a choice, right? And I think that's a misconception still in our sport, is that of course the gymnast would rather do a back walkover on beam.
Oh my
They'd rather
gosh.
do giants on high bar. They'd rather do, men's gymnastics has a lot of fear with dismounts. Like there's a really big dismounts. It's like, of course they would rather do it, right? It's not that they're just like being, pessimistic. They want someone to just not be able to help them. And I think that that's really important to resonate, because not that I want to go in the weeds of a lot of the, the brain things about it, but I think people understand the whole fight or flight nervous system response. But if you look in neurology research around animals and other things, freezing is like another very useful protective response to
Yes.
prevent yourself from having threats. So animals, when they're approached by, some sort of predator, they'll just freeze up and they'll hide and the predator will walk away. Like that's a very useful strategy to not get eaten.
Absolutely.
And that's essentially what's hardwired into us. Is it's not a choice voluntarily that this athlete is standing there and trying to swing their arms and stopping. And how many times do you see also someone's nervous for a skill, say they're doing like a back tuck or a back full or a double, whoever, and they actually get the courage to do the round off back handspring and you're like, oh, this is going to happen. But then they just stop dead on the back handspring and just stalls and they flat back, right? That is that built-in hardwired freeze response, because clearly we're pushing ourselves outside the comfort level of what we're comfortable with. And so I think that's just really important to highlight to people, is that it's not a choice. People would love to be able to do the skill, and you just putting them in a situation, whether they're standing on the beam while everyone's watching, or the whole floor is looking around them, watching them tumble, or someone's watching a guy do a dismount and they're all standing there trying to cheer. It might be beneficial and in good nature, but that's not a really good pressure situation to force
Mhm.
that to happen, because you're not actually relearning, you're not molding through the problem. You're just getting lucky if it does happen. And then every time they try to do it, it's another terrifying experience. So yeah, I don't know.
Mhm.
Is that I'm naive compared to your skill set. So I'm more so offering this as a thought experiment, but is that true? Am I wrong there?
Yes, absolutely. And every kid who has a mental block will tell you that their really sweet teammates going, "You got this, you can do it," is the worst when
Mm,
you're standing on that beam and you're like, "But I can't." And
mm,
now everyone's watching me fail. It's it's the actual worst.
yeah. Yeah. Coming from experience, I feel you and I both understand this. I've had this. I had the twisties so bad when I was in high school. I was like, did a
Mm,
layout well, did a full, then it was like 1 1/4 to my side, trying to do double fulls. And it was just like side, side, side. And I had to go all the way back and relearn
mhm.
a back layout. So,
Yep, that's it. Well, and so there are 2 ways to overcome this freeze response.
yep.
And so you touched on one of them. One of them, and I think a lot of people in my field like to lean on this one, and I think coaches like to lean on this one, desire. If
Mm,
you want it badly enough, you will go. And there is a little bit of truth to this.
okay.
That if you it's why the kid hasn't done it in practice, but they show up at the meet and somehow they can do it all of a sudden,
Mm,
or they just have to do one and then they can go home. And they can and what essentially happens is that they've got this fear response that their brain is saying you could die.
mm,
And their motivation is, I'd rather die than not go for this right now. They are willing to take that risk because there's so much potential embarrassment. There's so much potential backlash from a coach, from their parents, from, all of these perceived threats, that they can summon the desire to, I call it chuck and pray,
mm.
and they do it. And then everyone's like, see, that was so easy. Good job. You're amazing. We're so proud of you now. And then they get back to practice. They can't do it.
Right.
And so that can happen when, that's why you go to college camp and you get superpowers and all of a sudden you can do all your skills.
Right.
You go to
Right.
Woodward, you go, well, not anymore, but you go, you go to camp or you go to a new gym and you can do your stuff for a
New
little while
environment, new setting, new people. Right.
because you've got this drive where you're like, I want this so badly that it overpowers the fear.
Mm,
But that's always going to just be a band-aid. I know a girl who used to bet with her teammates, I'll give you $5 if I don't go for my vault. And then
mm,
she had to start going like $10. Then it was $20. Then she could only bet with the kids she knew would make her pay up because she had to always be raising the ante on the desire
right.
because it's
Right.
not the lasting solution. It's
Mm.
just it's like, and I tell the kids, I'm like, so therefore you could go to the meet and you could do it and it could be great, but it's not the actual solution to the problem.
Yeah, and not to interject because I want to hear reason too, but I won't say who this was, where this was, what I was doing, but I was at a gym and somebody came from another gym and they had a lot of mental blocks around bar releases. She was very good in other 3 events, but when she did shoot overs, she was like terrified, right? Sometimes it would happen, sometimes it would not. So she was like, can you threaten me with conditioning to make me go? Because that's what worked
Mhm.
in her old gym. And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, not even a question, because like we always had a joke that we don't barter with conditioning. We don't barter for good nor for bad. So I'm not going to say, if you all make your releases, you get out of conditioning. And I'm not going to say, if you don't make your releases, everybody has to do rope climbs. Like, I just don't fundamentally believe in that because it doesn't put the locus of control in their court and it's them on their decisions. So yeah, go forward. But that was another example of something that's not a good long-term solution. It's a Band-Aid.
No, but it does work sometimes, which is why I think a lot of coaches will fall back on it because
Right.
they're like, well, I just got a
Just check it out.
motivator to go for it.
Yeah.
But it's not a motivation issue. It's can we make more fear of
Mm,
something else than
sure.
the fear of death and injury? Like,
Yeah.
ugh,
Yeah.
not ideal.
Yeah.
So the lasting way is building confidence.
Mm,
And I learned this from my mom, who was a singer, and she had horrible stage fright, horrible, like debilitating stage fright. But she went on to do off Broadway and she went to performing arts high school. And she said, you prepare so much that you cannot miss. And
mm,
then the fear is lower than the confidence. The confidence just
right.
goes above it. So your fear might be up to your eyeballs, but your confidence is up just a little bit above that.
Mm,
And then you've got the ability to work through it.
mm,
And that's built slowly over time
sure.
on a foundation of awareness of, what are my triggers? Like you said, what are my patterns?
Mm,
And then you slowly build up to it and you build this foundation that allows your brain to not only like be willing to let you do it once, but to actually trust it.
Yeah. Yeah. And on this too, again, this is me. I think I'm selfishly just asking to learn more myself. I think that's what the podcast has become, is me just trying to talk to people to learn more. But something, I mean, I've been extensively vocal that I've been through therapy. I've had my own issues. Like I've worked through that, but anxiety and a lot of the things triggering for that, which comes back to what a lot of gymnasts go through and why sports performance and sports psychology helps, is unfortunately the only way out is through graded exposure if something's going to happen. And I think something I was fascinated by reading the research on this and stuff like that is like, when you are either going through graded exposure or you're learning healthy coping mechanisms to work through this, you're not replacing the old neurological circuits and patterns of things like that. You're learning something new that is an alternative strategy to get the job done, right? And I think that's, again, something that a lot of maybe coaches who I love to death, are well-intentioned, maybe don't understand, is that the goal is actually not to replace that habit or replace that, old thing or old like type of approach they have. It's to try to understand what the fundamental issue is and rebuild a new strategy or a new way to cope with that discomfort, and then find a way to go another way. Am I correct there? Am I wrong? Because I feel like graded exposure was always the answer when I came back to books, therapy, podcasts, whatever. It was like, okay, if you want this, you have to do it, but not like this level of high beam back walkover is too much. But then like tumble track with a spot is way too low. We have to build an exposure pattern all the way back up. Am I wrong there? Or
no, that's spot on, 100%. And I mean, it's baby steps, like for the layman, it's baby steps.
Right.
But here's the thing that people get wrong, is that they assume you do 3 on the low beam, you do 3 on the medium beam, you do 3 on the high beam, and then you are there
in one 20-minute practice or 30
in one 20-minute practice, and then you just cheer really hard, and then they're good to go. When what's happening is your brain has created this mechanism that says this is not safe. So this and the kid's body can do the skill, no problem. It's often a very talented kid who has a lot of power or a lot of grace, who can physically do the skill, I'm going to say perfectly when they get there, but their brain can't do it. So I tell the kids, your body can do it, does not need a spot, but your brain needs a spot right now. Your brain needs that baby step. So I have them find that perfect progression where they're out of their comfort zone, they're stretching their current capacity, but they will be successful.
Right.
That's the key. That's the sweet spot, everybody. It's fine, but that moves around day by day. Sure. That's the other hard part, is that they go, well, yesterday you did it on the pit bar, so let's go do it, or yesterday you got up to the high beam by the end of, 45 minutes of baby steps. So get on the high beam and go. But you don't know what their sleep was last night. You don't know what their lunch was today. You don't know what happened in school. You don't know what happened to their best friend. You don't know how their foot is feeling today. Everything could, their baseline confidence, especially for an adolescent who has got so much flying around in their, their world of self-awareness and confidence.
Change, puberty, right.
Oh my gosh, all the things. Every day is different. So for an athlete to expect of themselves that they start right back where they left off yesterday is an unreasonable expectation. And so you have to take it moment by moment and go, all right, brain. And I even have them talk to their brain like it's their little pal. Brain, what do you got today? What do you need? You need a magic 1-finger spot today? Let's go ask for it. Instead of, oh, this is so stupid. I can't believe I am still on the low beam when all of my friends are on high beam and I should be able to do this. I already won beam with this skill.
Right.
What's wrong with me? That is just, it's like they're going up the down escalator. They're putting in the reps, they're putting in the numbers, but they're being so hard on themselves in the meantime that they're eroding their own confidence faster than they can build it.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely want to come back to that, because that's going to be a crucial part of this whole solution base. I don't know why my brain is going here. I've been listening to a lot of neurology lectures lately and stuff like that. And it's just some fascinating points for people I just want to try to drive home the point that this is not something that someone's doing voluntarily. It's really like part of our biology. So one is actually, it's really interesting. Andrew Huberman is one of my favorite like neuroscientists right now at Stanford. And he had a podcast with Jordan Peterson talking about drive and motivation and getting over fear. His lab studies extensively anxiety and fear in like virtual reality settings. And he was just like talking on a podcast about how like dopamine, which everyone thinks is like this like reward, it's actually not reward, it's motivation and seeking and drive. And so what happens is when you strive for a goal that is just outside of your discomfort level and you have a meaningful result, which is you're successful at it, you actually do your back handspring on medium beam, there's this large reward of feeling good about it because it's done and it's over, but it reinforces the desire to want to do that again because you were successful at it versus the goalpost is too far and say it's going to high beam with everybody watching and you don't do it, that takes a negative outcome and a negative response. And it has a crash of that desire that you don't go back to baseline levels of dopamine and drive and adrenaline. You go below. Yes. And so that's everybody knows the feeling of like, they want to have like this giant meal with all this food. And like, after it, you're just like it's a sub level of dopamine, but it's important here because people are sometimes, I think, setting up they're jumping too far ahead in the skill progression, or they're jumping too aggressively in how many reps they want successfully. So there's an unsuccessful result. That's a negative feedback loop for like, this is too hard. I don't want to do it. It's not going to work out well. So I just found that was very interesting. I was listening to that last night and thinking about this podcast because really the key is to understand we have to reverse engineer what are the skill progressions we can be successful at, and then not have a timeline associated with it, right? Like if it's a skill like a beam series, and something's really frustrating or it's hard and there's a meet coming up, you just have to throw it out and be like, we're going to take a 1.5 point deduction with your beam routine. We're not going to look at the score, and it is what it is. And we're going to work slowly to get our series back. If it takes 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, then whatever. But like every time you push it too hard and it doesn't go well, you really build up some walls. Is that thoughtful?
I mean, 100%. Yep. That's exactly it. And I teach it like a piggy bank, especially to like the, the little 8 and 9-year-olds, like your confidence is like a piggy bank. And every time you do that back walkover on a line, you're putting pennies in. And every time you do it on a low beam, you're putting nickels in. And every time you stack up 1 million mats and you're putting quarters in, you're putting dimes in. Every time that you do one and your brain goes, oh, that was safe. Oh, that felt good. That felt good. Oh, my hands were in the right place. My hips were square. That felt good. Every time that happens, you're filling your piggy bank and you get to the point where you get that, like, this is unscientific, but Coach Briley on my team, she calls it that click. You get the click where you're like, okay, I think I got this. And you get up and you're like, I want to try it. I want to go to the high beam. But every time you freeze up, it's like taking $5 out of the bank. It is such a blow to your confidence because then you get all the negative self-talk. I can't do it. I'm broken. What's wrong with me? And that adolescent negative self-talk comes in and takes over. And so you are better off making 25 on the medium beam than 3 on the high beam where you freeze.
Right.
For the long-term benefit. And you're building up this foundation of reps and the neuroplasticity. You're having those little pathways every time.
You're carving out a new model, right?
Yeah. Every time you try something that feels a little scary and you are successful, little fireworks go off in your brain.
Yeah.
And you go, I can do it. You have a past success that you can pull from for the next try.
Yeah. Well, this is working out well because Dave's in like nerd world right now for research, so I can actually share. So yeah, there's the fireworks are the dopamine releasing endogenous opioids, which is like the feel good chemicals that we have when we complete a goal, if it's been a meaningful pursuit on the other side. And that's why sometimes you get into hot water with, in daily life with things like food or with like, social media, because it's a large amount of dopamine for not a meaningful pursuit of effort and work and discomfort and graded exposure. It's just like an instant dump. So that's just one part. But two is back to this whole conversation of, that Jordan Peterson and them have is like a lot of these things come down to 2 parts of the brain that are wrestling with each other, our like logic based side and our emotional side. It's very like, the front of our brain is very much the thought, projecting ourselves into future scenarios. That's why we're good at humans. And then you have this fear response, which is very much amygdala and limbic driven. So as you have exposure to something that's very fearful, your brain cements that as very fearful, the hot stove, as you said. But the front part of your brain, when you're thinking about getting up on the high beam, right? The thought process here in research is that your brain instantly goes through multiple outcomes and it simulates, okay, what would happen if this happened, if this happened, if this happened, if this happened, if this happened. That's why we're very good as humans, because we can forward time travel, right? It's an autonoetic consciousness for those people that are aficionados and are dorks. You can put yourself in different time and place. So a gymnast standing up on the beam watching that, if they don't have the reps behind them of confidence in building that piggy bank, as you said, when they see the high beam and they project forward, what's going to happen? It's going to be death. I'm going to land on my head. Everyone's going to laugh at me. It's going to be embarrassing. I'm never going to do this again. I'm awful at gym. And down the spiral. So the thought process that happens with a lot of anxiety graded exposure, people who are struggling with this and Dr. Huberman's lab and others, is that by making your piggy bank, you then have more of a forward projection of success. Like, oh, you know what? I actually did do 15 or 20 on the medium beam over the last couple of weeks. I feel more confident about this going well. I have more positive outcomes in my mind than negative outcomes. So like, this is something we would never talk about with an 8-year-old who's doing a back walkover. But as a coach, as a parent, as someone who's working with someone struggling, you have to understand this is the hardwired nature of what's happening in an athlete. It's not just like they're not being mentally tough and they're being a baby. They're forward projecting terrifying outcomes. And if you know that, you're going to avoid that. You know what I mean? So yeah, Dave's neurology lessons for the day, but it's just
I love it.
Research, you know?
Yep. Yep. And that is why the kid is at the chalk box for, 45 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes between turns, because their brain's like, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. And they're like, I'm just going to be here as long as I need to be. I'm just chalking up. Don't worry, coach. I'm just chalking up.
6 more drills over there and bathroom break over there.
Yep. Got to, I'm really thirsty. All of a sudden, got to fix my hair. For me, it was the sweat. I had to wipe my hands, wipe my feet, wipe my hands, wipe my feet over and over. Cause I was like, I just got to just wipe it enough that I'll feel okay. Cause my brain was like, don't do it, Rebecca.
Yeah.
It's not safe.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to kind of recap where we're at, cause this is a fantastic kind of path we're taking, but we do have that, like, I guess that drive, that desire for some athletes that probably will be useful to get through the initial ones, because maybe their mind works in that way. But for other people, it's going to be a confidence building. It's going to be a graded exposure. It's going to be, for me and other people, I think it's helpful to break down and have to actually understand the skill of, like, why do you pull into the bar? Like, what causes you to come into the bar, right? And you can kind of work through, because as somebody understands logically why they might get hurt, they can then have more to brew on it. Like, oh, I understand why this is going wrong. I can fix this. That's the logical part. So for flyaways, right, it's like not having your ears covered or tapping too late, right? If you tap back here, it sends you this way. If you tap out here, it sends you this way, right? Same thing with beam and back walkovers. Like, it's like, well, if I don't really get my arms all the way over my head, if I don't jump really hard in my back handspring, those things tend to be a little bit more
or
risky.
if my hand placement is off. There's always those, if your technique feels iffy. So if the kid has grown 3 inches in the last 6 months, then their flyaway feels weird. And they don't know the timing. They feel like they don't know how to do it anymore. So if your brain's like, are you guessing here on timing? Then it's going to be like, we're just going to hold on. I'm just going to hold on, because and so, getting, like, doing the drills, getting the shoulders open, getting the timing, doing those little things that they did when they were a level 3. They're doing them again as a level 7, because their body's different, because it feels different, because their technique has changed, because their center of gravity is different, because a coach told them to change their hand placement on beam. And then ever since, they haven't felt quite right, because they haven't really drilled that. It's like, it makes sense when you break it down. Like, well, girl, that's a brand new skill. You just learned a brand new skill, which is a flyaway with this body.
Right.
Or a back handspring with that hand placement. That is a brand new skill that you got to start building from the basics and allow your brain to settle into the fact that it is, in fact, safe and predictable. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And I think, so concrete steps, and interrupt me if I'm wrong here. So we do have that desire part, but it's probably not the best path forward for most people. It's a kind of like the outliers, but for most people, it's going to be maybe recognizing and understanding this is normal. That's part of what's going on here, but then breaking it down and understanding why something is not going right, whether it's the tapping of a flyaway, the arm swing of a back handspring, something like that. You don't look at the floor when you take off, so your head whips back on like all these coaching cues are things that can be understood. Shout out to Nick Ruddick, who has many great drills here for these kind of things. But those kind of like understanding pieces are really, really important. And then on top of that, which is then having cues, as you mentioned, to kind of cue yourself on what needs to happen. Swing my arms, look here, tap here, all these things. From there, it's really about graded exposure and reinforcement on things they can be successful at a very small dosage, and then maybe widening out our timeline of how long we expect this to happen, and or widening out our expectations of how many reps it's going to take over not 3 hours, but over 3 weeks, right? To get that slow build of confidence, of piggy bank, like you said. That seems as though to me that's probably the most realistic approach to the majority of people who are struggling with that, which is understanding it, having cues, doing drills and graded exposure, taking away a timeline of when it needs to be done by, but also really putting the ball in their court, which is like, I can't make you do this. I will help you on your journey, but this is up to you to do the drills and to show up to practice and not be in the chalk bucket for 8 hours and stuff like that. I feel like that's a pretty good logical progression for most people, no?
Yes. And there's a couple things that I would add.
Please.
One critical piece is communication.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, the kids who get stuck in this pattern of mental blocks are not the most stellar communicators. They are the little sweetie pie who doesn't want to make waves and who just wants to make their coach happy and has typically operated in a chuck and pray mentality
Mm,
as far as it would get them, because they didn't want to say no to their coach and they didn't want to need extra help. So those kids, I mean, the first thing that I do with them and say, okay, let's find your progression. Let's find your, your baby step that your
mm,
brain will allow you to take right now that will also be moving you forward.
right.
Then how are we going to tell your coach that that's what you need?
Right.
And how, so first you have to figure out, what do I need? Because a lot of kids are not aware. They're used to coach saying, do this, and they do this. They're not used to going, well, what actually could I do right now? They get
Mm,
stuck in the I can't. But I ask them, well, what can you do?
yeah.
And they're like, well, that's not good enough. I'm like, no, that's what you got. So that's where we start.
Right.
Then, excuse me, coach, I would really love to do the assignment that you've asked me to do. I want to be able to do it. Right now, my brain feels like it's holding me back. And I think what I can do successfully is X. Would it
Mm,
be okay if I did that first?
yep.
Kind of teaching this language of, yes, coach, I want to do that. Yes, like we have the same goals. I want to be able to do this. And I think if I do this first, I'll be able to get there.
Sure.
Or, because a lot of coaches are like, well, no, you just go do 3, then do 3, then do 3, and we move on. We do the next assignment.
Sure.
And it's a different experience. And the coach cannot read the kid's mind. Just because you're crying on the beam does not mean that your coach knows what is going on or what
Yeah.
you need.
Yeah.
So that communication is critical to be
Mm,
able to, like, that's, I talked with Samantha Peshek. I've talked with Kyla Ross, these girls who had mental blocks in their
yeah.
lower levels
Yeah.
and even into the higher levels. And the thing that got them through it was really great communication with their coach.
Right.
And it's 2 parts. They said what they needed. The coach said, okay.
Yes. And I definitely want to come back to the coaching point. I think the last thing to wrap up here is that this communication piece is definitely outward facing, which is we talked about, we're talking about coaching and parents, stuff like that. But I really want to make sure we touch on the internal communication, which is something we didn't come back to, which is this is definitely true of a lot of female gymnasts that I work with, which is oftentimes between a billion things you could pin it to. Everybody is their own worst critic, right? They're just completely like trashing themselves, things they would never say to other people out loud because it's just rude and cruel, but they are constantly saying them to themselves. I'm such a baby. I can't believe I can't do this. I'm never going to do it. I'm awful at gymnastics. I'm the worst, right? It happens so often internally that they're beating themselves down. And in the male culture, I for sure know that this is like the biggest thing. Like, you're being a pansy. Why would you, like, you should just do it. Just toughen up. Like, there were so many dudes growing up that you could just see, like they were like a ghost in a shell. I could see behind their eyes how scared they were and how much pain they were. They would just swallow it down because that's how you got to be tough as a guy. And you just do it and you get hurt and you just eat shit. And you're just like, well, that's what gymnastics is, being tough, And I think that that's a really dangerous place to put people in as young males, particularly, but also like growing up as a female. Is you need to have, some sort of internal communication check and balances. Again, this is going down the therapy route of like, cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff. But I think if there's no, because the like self-love and self-kindness and self-talk and stuff is really woo-woo and sometimes squishy for a lot of people that are hardcore gymnasts. But that honestly is one of the only things that helped me get out of really hard spots, was like just genuinely being self-compassionate and kind to yourself. But again, if you say that out loud, everyone kind of treats that as like let's toughen up here a little bit. But I think that's fundamentally one of the biggest things that is not happening in sports, which is a solid self-esteem and self-confidence piece, and like open access to therapy. But that's a different conversation. So can you talk maybe on the importance of, that kind of internal dialogue, and not so much not having it, but having a checks and balances to talk back to it a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I would even go beyond necessarily self-talk, because not everybody's audio. An audio
Sure.
learner is
Sure.
going to resonate with self-talk. Somebody
Yeah.
who is kinesthetic, it's going to be a different strategy for them. Someone who is a visual learner is going to need something else to make them feel confident
Right.
than what's being said to them. So I think sorry, just like
That's good. Not to interrupt there. I'll say this is
yeah.
actually, I'm one of the lack of audible people. Like, talking to myself out loud feels like the cheesiest thing ever. I was going to turn, but I can't. I have like 17 journals that are stacked up next to me that I've been since like 2016 when I started like doing more of this work. So I am like, for sure, I can tear it up in pages of a journal, but it would never come out of my mouth to myself. It feels way too cheesy. But a journal has been like my godsend. So like for some people who are more like internal, they want to just journal about it. They want to keep it closed. They want to have the narrative up here and then use that to go out in the world, which is what I do. But like some other people, like you said, are very audible. They want to literally say it out loud. Other people are very visual and they want to have something, a quote or something to kind of anchor themselves to. So I think that's maybe what you're saying here, right?
Yes. Well, yes. So, and I want to go beyond like the actual strategy and think of it more holistically.
Sure.
Like there's the physical part of mental block recovery, which is the baby steps, it's the communication, it's what you do in the gym. Then there is the relationship you have with yourself. This
Mm,
is what gets your escalator going up.
got
This
it.
is what speeds up that staircase and gets you to a place where you can get your skills back quickly. You can catch them when they're starting to slip, and it's this. It's ultimately like so. We build awareness, we build confidence, and then the last piece is trust.
Mm,
Self trust. It's exactly what you said. Would you trust someone who speaks to you the way you speak to yourself when you're struggling? If a coach said to you, "Wow, you are awful. Like, I can't believe what's wrong with you. Like, why are you on the low beam? This is so dumb." Would you trust that coach? No. If you talk to your friends that way, would they trust you? No. So you have to have a relationship with yourself that allows you to feel safe,
mm,
to make mistakes, to to get your hand placement not quite right, to pull in a little bit on the bar. You have to have a relationship with yourself where you can be not perfect and be in the journey and accept it. And so that's, I mean, that like the self-love, the self-respect, the self-trust is like the first literally we have like 8 challenges. And when I
mm,
teach, the first challenge is what we've talked about today, which is those baby steps. The other 7 are the relationship you have with yourself that
mm,
allows you to back off, trust your brain, be kind to yourself, have compassion. I mean, and this is like we Trojan horse this in. This is what I
mm,
want this is what I needed when I was 12. I was so mean to myself. I was so hard on myself. I kept quitting on everything because I was like, well, I just am no good.
mm,
And I quit my sport. I quit all these things because I fundamentally felt like I am no good. And so when I created this relationship with myself, it was like, oh, now I can do scary things because I actually can believe that
mm,
it's possible for myself.
mm.
So, and that comes in so many different ways. So for some people, it's the way you talk to yourself. For some people, it's what you imagine. For some people, I mean, it's just your relationship with struggle, your
Mm,
relationship with discomfort to know, like, yes, I have evidence from my past that I am
right.
good enough. I can do this. And today, good enough is the low beam with a magic finger spot.
Mm,
And that is good enough. It's a lot of dismantling perfectionism because perfectionism is one of the biggest indicators of a
right.
mental block.
Right, right. Yeah, and I can piggyback on the whole, trying to get people, everyone always feels like often with anxiety and depression, they feel like they're literally the only person on the planet who suffers with this. But being
Yeah.
very transparent about my situation is like I read so many books before I went to therapy because I was like, I can just do this on my own. Like I can figure it out. Like there's no big problem. But going through so much of stuff in therapy, the only things that ever actually moved the needle on how I felt in terms of performance wise, but also in terms of like just genuine happiness is like having a shift from an external to an internal source of self-esteem. I think that's really, really important. Like getting
Yes.
away from it's the skill, it's the score, it's the coach says good job, it's the friends like me, it's whatever. It's shifting that narrative and that source internally, which is like literally right now, my whole life is based around like self-esteem is, am I being nice and am I working hard? Like that's all my
Mhm.
life is overall. If I'm not being nice and I'm not working hard, I get on myself, and my friends oftentimes will get on me too. Like the girls who like really know me well, my friends who really know me well, they're like, you're kind of drifting here, and I understand why you're
Mhm.
upset right now because you're starting to lean outwards for everyone's approval. And that's really,
Mhm.
really important in gymnastics in a world where you're literally judged all the time. I think that's very, very important. I also think that it
Mhm.
does come down to doing some of the work, which is that internal dialogue, that graded exposure, that not comparing to other people. Like that only can be executed on if you have that change from external to internal point of view. And I think it naturally kind of moves on to a conversation, which is the role that coaches and that parents play in mental blocks and confidence and stuff like that. So can you maybe share your experiences on what I don't know. I don't want to go with bad examples, but I want to go with great examples of coaching or parents that seem to be very supportive and helpful in these situations.
Yes. So one of my favorite humans, Vahid, he owns Unify Athletics. He has this incredible culture. Incredible culture. It is humans first. That's the way he runs his gym. He actually had left a gym that was really toxic, and there were,
Mm,
there were articles written. It was a toxic environment. He was like, I can't coach here, so he left. And his kids were like, well, where are you going? He's like, I don't know. And so they're like, well, we better start a gym. So he
oh,
starts a
nice.
gym, and he puts the kids first. And his gym does not have mental blocks. They do not exist. It
Sick.
just doesn't happen because they have such great communication. When an athlete is struggling and not feeling confident, they break it down immediately. They get the help they need immediately. No one's afraid to ask for a spot. No one's afraid to ask for a drill. Everybody works together to figure out, where do I need to be today? It's very much athlete led.
Right.
And so there's this, I think, this fear maybe with coaches that, like, well, if you do that, then where are they going to go? Are they going to
Yeah.
make it? And then they start winning.
Mm.
They start winning. About a year of culture, a just heavy focus on human-centered coaching. Like, we are helping humans to succeed. And then they just start to win. And
Mm.
they were like national champs on bars.
Mm.
Just this incredible story. And it's all about that relationship with the kids, where the coach, they know they can go to their coach. They know that they can talk to their coach, and he's going to hold them accountable
Mm.
to live up to their best selves.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's gyms where there are lots of mental blocks. And then the whole group, it's like the whole level 7 group is being punished because they all can't get it together and do their back handsprings. And I'm like, okay, what's happening here is that there's the communication is not there. The kids are
Mm.
not being asked, what can you do? They're
Mm.
being told, you need to do this, and you stay there until you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that those moments of staying on beam while everyone's gone to the other event, feeling like they're failing over and over and over, you're
Mm.
eroding confidence. So
Mm.
environments where you put the child's confidence first, I'm saying child because these
Yeah.
are children.
Literally.
When you put the child's confidence at the forefront, ahead of your banners and your medals and your scores, that child, they come first. That's when that kid is going to feel safe to say, this is feeling weird today.
Mm.
Can you help me?
Right.
And then you don't have the backslide, because it's not like the kid feels weird, then they try it and it feels scary, then they try it again, it feels bad, then they try it again, they can't do it.
Yeah.
They stop it on the weird.
Yeah.
They come to you when it feels weird, and then you solve it together right
Yeah.
away. And then
Yeah.
there is no mental block.
Yeah. Again, this goes back to this concept of normalizing mental health and normalizing fear as a normal part of gymnastics. In the same way that if somebody sprained their ankle and needed slow exposure back to rehab and back to their drills and stuff, everyone's like, yeah, that's part of gymnastics. But in the same way, it's that you have to be open and forward thinking. And I guess that's my 2 pieces of advice for coaching. One is that this goes back to the idea of, you said, not the banners, not the scores, not the whatever. That requires a coach. It requires a parent. It requires a gym owner to shift that self-esteem driver from external to internal, right? Because of course you want to be competitive. Of course you want to be successful. I run a business. Of course I want it to do well. But if that doesn't make me feel better or worse as a person, if it goes well or goes better. And this is of something I've been very vocal and I was guilty of as a younger coach, which is literally when the girls did well at meets and when other people said, oh my God, you guys are doing so well, and Dave, you're so smart, and this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. I felt better about myself as a human and as a coach. And then when it didn't go well, people weren't, getting skills, people weren't doing well at meets. I thought that someone was wrong with me and I was embarrassed. I was insecure, right? Let's be real. And so that's a huge problem. The problem is not other people. It's not, don't blame it on other people. It's responsibility and accountability. That the problem is that you are addicted to the attention of other people, right? And one of my, and one of the things that I saw in research and that I remembered back is this quote from Flip Fest was on the wall that John Roethlisberger put up. And it says that confidence is not, I need them to like me. It's I'll be okay if they don't. And I thought that was like massively powerful, because as coaches and as parents, we have to detach ourselves, our source of self-esteem away from our kids doing well, the athletes competing well, the gold medals, the banners, the scholarships, the number of level 10s, all that kind of stuff. And when you can work through your own personal stuff, therapy, whatever you want to do, and detach that to, I'm being nice, I'm working hard, I'm giving back to the community, I'm helping them on their journey, you can survive these roller coaster, good, bad routines, whatever, and you can be okay on the other side. The best coaches I know with the best gym clubs are independently happy regardless of the athlete's success. And I think that is extremely important and powerful for coaches and parents. That's my biggest piece of advice, is to detach that from you. And the second piece of advice is, if you don't understand why someone is having a mental block or what the technique is behind it or whatever, you have to go out of your way to be educated on that. And I was wildly undereducated on that as well. So those 2 things would be my piece of advice from a coach,
Yes, absolutely. And then you've got the parents.
Go on.
And and so, okay, so we noticed, I work with I've worked with thousands of kids on mental blocks.
Yep.
And there are some kids that just stayed stuck longer. And we, they did all the same stuff. We've got the plan there, and it's always one of two things, coach or the parent, that are undermining their success. And it's almost always the parent who cares, the parent who really wants to help, that is actually creating more stress. The parent who's like, go get that back walkover today, kiddo. Have a good day. Bye.
39 private lessons, right?
Yeah. Well, and then, so the kid gets out of the car and is like, like, there's no way I could do my back walkover today. I'm terrified of it, but my mom just said to go get it. So I'm going to fail and I'm going to let my mom down today. Great. And so there's, of course, like the coaches who don't want to do progressions, the coaches who say, you got to just go do it. That aren't listening. That's usually a very big, slowdown to the process. Yep. But these parents, they do too much. They're too involved. They're too stressed. They're too wrapped up in the score, the place, the level, the skill. So they're just like, I love you. I love you. You're so great. I'm so proud of you. But the kid is like crushed under the weight of the expectations because mom cares so much. So they feel like every day they don't do that back walkover, they're failing their mother. And every time they fall in a meet, they are failing their mother, which is, deeply terrifying to an adolescent female, or a male too. Yeah. But it's the pressure that comes from these parents who care, can be a really sticky spot.
Yep. And maybe the antidote to this, right, is awareness, which is, if you're listening to this podcast, hopefully you're someone who wants to gain more awareness, and maybe fostering a conversation from this podcast, like asking your son or daughter, like, is that how you feel sometimes? And maybe that brings some uncomfortable conversations, but it's important. But also too is, and I just keep thinking about how a lot of the people we've interviewed here and we have like at the elite level, all of their parents were unconditionally supportive and unconditionally loved them, regardless of whether they went far in gymnastics or not. Like I think about Sam, and I think about Colin Van Wickelen. I think about Jordan Weber and some other people. Just parents were parents who supported them, and they didn't put more on them. They were there logistically to drive to the meets and do the thing. They stepped in if they thought things were a little bit weird at the gym. They're like, no, I'm putting my foot down and protecting my son or daughter. Yes. But they were not overly involved. In contrary, I'm not going to obviously share their names, but I've talked behind the scenes with some very high level gymnasts on the international stage, and the ones that really struggle with confidence, they really struggle to seize the moment, is that their parents or their coaches or other people are putting extra pressure and weight on them. It's already super stressful to just hit your routine and perform well. But if you can have these environments, you can build these places that are unconditionally supportive, that we love you as a human no matter what, and we want to see you successful, but you're a human first and a gymnast second. And they create psychological safety, which is an environment where you're allowed to fail and you learn from that as a growth opportunity, not perfect at all costs, no matter what, you never mess up. I think that's just critical for people who are, dealing with gyms or cultures that maybe are not in the limelight of what we're talking about.
But then there's the whole, like, parents are wired how they're wired. Like, I'm an anxious person. My children are anxious children. Most of the time, the kids who struggle with nerves, they get it from somewhere, So mom's over here like, oh, I just want her to be happy. I just want her to not struggle. I just want her to not suffer. And they feel it so deeply. They so deeply want to help their kid to feel okay and to not be nervous and to be confident. So they feel like they'd chew off their left foot if it meant their kid would do this skill again. And so they're trying everything, and they don't realize that it's actually, often backfiring. If it feels to the kid, like, I am a mom, like, of course we love our kids unconditionally. Of course, if my kid quits gymnastics, I'm going to love her. Of course. It's like, there's no question. But does the kid know that? Do they know it often? That the reason that you love them is because they're them, period, end of story.
Right.
Not because they did a great job or tried hard. Like, do they know you love them on the day they didn't try? They didn't care. They didn't go for it. They had a bad attitude. Do they know that that's okay too? And it can be part of their process.
And I do have one more extension of this conversation before we maybe jump into the reality of what people will ask about, which is like, okay, but what if my gym is not supportive of this method or this approach and it's still very hardcore, too much pressure? But in my mind, as I've learned from a coach, I don't have kids, but I really feel as though the role modeling aspect in the doing, not saying is so critical in this position, because kids are constantly scanning and watching their parents, watching their friends, watching their coaches to just get feedback, but also to see what they're doing. Right. So obviously your kids will look up to you as parents. And if you're a coach who spends a lot of time with athletes, like I was coaching like, levels like 7 through 10, and it was a lot of hours per week that they were watching what I was doing. They were watching how I interact. And I think that when they see you get upset about a score or this, or you blow up, or you don't have good emotional regulation for a lot of reasons we don't have to go into, but that reflects that positive feedback loop that like, oh, I have to do this to make them happy, or that's how they're doing it. So I think that that's one of the hardest parts sometimes, is you can say all these things. You can say as a coach, you don't care about scores and you care about the person. As a parent, you can say it's not a big deal if you don't have a great performance. But then if they see you through nonverbal communication getting upset and getting cranky and having an awkward drive home after, instead of genuinely just being like, it's okay, I love you, these things happen, let's put it on the shelf until Monday and we'll come back and we'll deal with it at practice, or we'll deal with it whatever. I think that is more powerful than saying all the right things and all that kind of stuff. I mean, do you agree? Am I on brand there?
Yes, sir. That's it. It's like somebody yesterday was like, the hardest thing for me as a sport parent is managing my own stress and not having it
Yeah.
trickle down to my kid. And I'm like, and so what we don't want to do is go, I'm fine, which is what we're trying to teach them not to do, because we want them to communicate. And we go, I'm feeling really stressed.
Yeah.
And here's how I'm going to cope with it.
Yeah.
You're modeling, and you go, you know what, I'm going to get on the Peloton, or I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to call a friend, because that's how I deal with stress, because stress is real.
Right.
Instead of pretending they're okay and trying to be these perfect parents, which I am like, definitely not. So trying to go like, yeah, no, I'm so stressed. I'm so sorry. I've been like, lashing out at you. I've been really stressed. Here's how I'm going to cope. And then you show them how you cope and you teach them. And that's it. They're going to learn way more from how you behave than what you say.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing I want to mention here, because I think tough love is wonderful on the podcast, other people love it, is I used to do this as a coach, and other people, is you really have to self-audit those coping mechanisms. You really have to audit, like when you're stressed, when you're having a hard conversation, when you're very upset at the gym because something's not going well, how do you cope with those things? Do you cope with those things in a healthy way, or do you cope with those things in an unhealthy way? And in a lot of people's worlds for coaching, I have seen many situations where it seems as though their drive, their purpose for being competitive and putting so much of their life into the sport, and for parents for being super hardcore too, is not so much about the genuine development of the kid. It's what happens with the cheering on the back end, which is sitting at the bar, having a beer, everyone's saying, oh my God, you're so great, she did so well, I can't believe that. Or sitting around your, table, having a glass of wine with your friends, like, oh my God, she get a scholarship to Alabama. Oh my God, that's so amazing. She's so great. And you're like, yeah. Like, you want to be happy for your kids, obviously, but like, if your feedback loop of self-confidence is coming from what people say about your kid while you're having a drink at the bar in a dinner party, and then your confidence is built up that as a parent or a coach, like, I'm telling you, you are a glass house waiting to fall apart, because when those things go away, or when they choose to move on from gymnastics, or you don't have wine to get you through a stressful day, it's going to come crashing down. And I think that's I say that with love and with empathy, because I want people to be happy. But genuinely, if those are your unhealthy coping mechanisms, and that's the way you get validation, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I want to know about my kid is she worked her butt off. She stuck with it. She did something uncomfortable.
Sure.
She got out of her comfort zone. That's the praise, that I want to have for my child. And if someone else notices it, great. But I want to know that my kid can do hard things. Like that's what I want to know about. And that's when you get to that place where you value the effort and the progress above all else. And you look at your kid who did one rep between, endless chalk, and you go, you really worked hard for that. And I'm proud of you. I know how hard that was. And I'm so proud of you for sticking with it. I know this has been hard. That's the thing. Instead of, you only did one, why am I paying for this?
Yeah. I have an open challenge to anybody listening to this podcast, coach, parent, is all season, don't post any of the results or outcomes on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or anything. Don't. Like, just see how it makes you feel.
No scores, no places.
Yeah. If you're itching to if you take a bunch of pictures and you keep them in your camera because it makes you happy and you're proud genuinely, that's amazing. And I think you should do that. You should be proud, right? But if you instantly go snap to Facebook photo upload the moment after the meet is over and she got this score and this medal and this, she's so great, and look at all these videos, and that is like your go-to, like, I think you should really just get away from that for a season and see how that makes you feel, because that might give you some very good curiosity feedback moments about what the intentions are behind that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So last thing here before we move on and chat a little bit more is I just want to kind of definitely touch on someone who listens to this podcast and they say, I resonate with this. It makes sense. I believe in it, but there's not a single coach in my gym who gives a shit that this is important and that we'll talk about fear and we'll talk about mental block. They come from this like traditional hardcore mentality and everyone just does it. There's a lot of kids at the gym. They say you do 10 beam routines and that's what's up. And so I just want to kind of give people an alternative thought process to how do you survive that situation when, and I know this is a situation, not everybody, I know some amazing high level gyms that don't do this, but sometimes these tend to correlate with people who are very good technical coaches and their opportunity for scholarships is high in the higher levels or elite and stuff like that. And it's just like, well, this is what it takes to be a high level gymnast and get your scholarship. And I think that's unhealthy. So what's your experience maybe counseling parents and gymnasts through not ideal cultures?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the time kids that come to me are in environments that are not conducive to humans first.
Right.
And so that's a huge theme. So I get very much in the like, quit the gym, leave the gym, go better, find a better place. And I talked to Jonathan Horton and he was like, can I just say something, Rebecca? And I'm like, yes, Jonathan Horton, you can say whatever you want. He's
Shout
like,
out Tom Meadows, by the way. Great coach.
Yeah. Yeah. He says, if your coach doesn't listen to you, get a better coach. Get a better coach. Who will listen to you?
Hat tip.
So, I mean, there's that. But there's a couple things. Like I've worked with kids and they get to be, it's their choice. This is what hedges off burnout. If they feel like they are making a choice, they choose this gym, they choose this coach, they choose this place, they choose to be there. Acknowledging that their coach is doing things that are negatively impacting their confidence through the way that they're expecting progressions to work, through the way that they're not listening. They own that. And we go, okay, so you have to get really good at building a filter so that you can filter out the things that make it feel impossible. You're not good enough. If you don't get this, you're never going to move up. If you know, those types of language, they filter that out and go, okay, the correction is get my legs together. Got it. And they take in the correction and they let the rest go. They become the good coach. This is something I train the kids, you know, ask yourself like, who is the ideal coach for you? What are they like? How do they speak to you? What do they expect of you? And then ask yourself, you know, is that the way you're speaking to yourself? Because you're the one who's inside your head all day. You get to be the good coach and you can take that good coach with you anywhere. But if you're in an environment where that coach is tearing you down, you need to be accountable. Like that coach needs to be accountable. So it's have a conversation with that coach. Like, you know, the parent, like I have them ask, what is your intention? You know, the kid's struggling. I see that this is the method. Can you explain to me kind of what the process is that you're going through? Because I see the kid up on the beam for 4 hours, not going for something. I'd love to know your methodology. Please enlighten me. I would like to understand. And so they create this, like, I want to listen to you, coach. Tell me how this is going to work for my kid. And then they go, well, this is what I'm seeing at home. This is what I'm seeing as a result of this method. It doesn't seem like that's lining up with what you're looking for. Right. So what can we do? And they, you know, brainstorm. And then if something doesn't change, you go up the chain. You talk to the head coach, you talk to the gym owner. Yeah. And you communicate. You don't just like, you know, bash them on the internet and go straight to safe sport. Like you talk to the coach, talk to their boss, talk to their boss. If nothing changes, then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to have to put this filter up in order to protect my confidence in this environment that is not ideal emotionally? Or can I go shopping for a better place? And oh my gosh, how many times do I see people switch gyms and the mental blocks disappear?
Right.
So if you worry about that, like get out of the abusive environment.
You said the same thing that I was thinking, which is amazing, which is I think that it is important to just note and remember that a lot of coaches are very well intentioned, but the way that they were raised in the 80s and 90s is this is how you approach mental blocks, is how you approach fear, and it works eventually. And maybe they don't realize that what they're doing is possibly not the best strategy. So the majority of people are amazing. And I want to say that because the podcast can sometimes get like a little bit like, tough love you and stuff like that. But like I met a lot of great coaches who are incredible humans, and they just generally feel as though they don't have the tools to help with the situation. And so they're trying to do the best they can. And then the second piece of that too, which is as parents and kids, it's hard to understand empathy as a concept, but parents and other coaches who are in these environments watching is that, hurt people hurt people. So oftentimes someone who's screaming and yelling and is being mean and is being whatever, they're deeply hurting in their personal life or something going on with them. They're maybe not happy with their lifestyle, their habits, their place in life, financially, whatever. They're overworked and underpaid. So having a lens of empathy, it doesn't make anything excusable. Clearly, if it's harmful or it's not, there's no excuse for it. But a lot of people who are just like psychologically warfaring kids and are just tone is just harsh and it's like they're hurting. I have a couple situations around the world, we'll just say, because I don't want to narrow this in, that the person who is leading the gym in the high level situation is just ruthless, right? They're just like very cut and dry, 10 routines. That's what you do. Injuries don't really have that much besides go over there, fix it, come back when you're done. But the person is burnt out. The person is extremely burnt out. They don't want to own a gym anymore. They don't want to coach anymore. They just want to be with their family and their dog and travel the world and do whatever. And I'm empathetic to that. Like I get it. Like they wanted to retire 5 years ago. And I'm like, okay, I see that. It's not excusable. But when I educate the coaches and that work with them and the kids about that, I'm like, listen, this is probably what's going on. They just want to move on with life. And this is stressful. You shouldn't let that slide. Stand up for yourself and don't, take that. But with a lens of empathy, it's sometimes easier to have those conversations. And then I agree completely, which is you talk one-on-one out of practice with the person in a meeting, not during a beam rotation or not during a floor rotation. And you just clearly stand up for yourself and say, listen, I know that you think this is helpful, but this is not helpful. Like this is not helping my mental blocks. This is not helping my fear and my anxiety. And you have that conversation. You say like, I'd offer some things to change. Here's what I think might be useful for me. And if that works and it doesn't say, oh yeah, we'll do that. But then when practice comes, nothing changes. You go to the head team coach and then you go to the gym owner and then you go to the state rep and you work your way up until you get to a point where like, okay, this person is not going to change and you move on, right? You look at another gym, you choose to prioritize your mental health and physical health over gymnastics. That's an option too. Like there's oftentimes a way to get help outside of the gym or move on. And, you have to just make hard choices, right? This is really about if I had a son or a daughter and I knew they loved gymnastics and I knew they wanted to do it, and it just was not healthy. And there was no gym within an hour that I could financially get to and afford time-wise to get to. I would tell them, I love you, but I'm your parent and my job is to protect you. And right now, this is an unsafe environment for you to grow up in. And so we're going to stop. And if you want to hate me for it and you're upset with it and you're really mad, that's okay. Because that's hard as a parent. Right. And I'm not a parent. So obviously you can maybe close this loop for us, but that's where I feel as though I would be, even though it'd be the harder thing, it's the right thing to do. And I firmly believe that's the way you should lead life.
I absolutely agree. I would not. And I actually, before even considering putting my child in 3-year-old gymnastics, I vetted the culture.
Scoping them out.
Because I was like, if this gym is unhealthy, I will not even let her fall in love with this sport.
Right.
I won't. Her little heart, soul, spirit. I was crushed. I was 23 years old before I had any self-esteem as a direct result of the way I was coached in gymnastics.
Yeah.
I'm just not willing to put my child in an environment where she's going to have to feel that same way.
Yeah. And I do want to say lastly, I know we keep saying lastly, but as a parent, you have to remember too, that you have to be emotionally mature and approach these things with calm and with poise and with just factual information. Like I've seen so many parents take a small assumption or a thread and they explode on Facebook. They explode on social media and they're just vomiting out their suspicions, their assumptions, they're jumping to conclusions. They're not really doing it. But if you're a parent or you're someone, because I've actually had these conversations with parents as someone who's unhappy with the way we run things, because we were like changing our culture aggressively. And they're like, no, we got to train more hours and do more reps and go to these meets. And I was like, listen, you're welcome to come in and we'll have a conversation. Me and Eva, we can sit down, we can talk about it. I'll explain my point of view. You'll explain your point of view. And if you don't agree with that, that's okay. We'll help you find another gym. We'll help you move on. So as a parent, you have to approach those things with poise, but you need a spine, man. You need a spine. Like you have to be able to go in there in a private meeting and say, listen, I don't agree with the way you guys lead your gym. That's okay. But we're taking our daughter elsewhere, or you have these opportunities to change, or we're moving on. And it doesn't have to be more than that. It is what it is. Like there's unlimited things in life that you have to have a spine for and stand up for what you believe in and what you think is morally right. And I think that having that not wiggle room on some things like that. Like my son or daughter's mental health is one of those non-negotiables for me. And so
Absolutely.
Eva and I have talked extensively about this, and we both feel firmly on this, but the gyms that do this will be rewarded, right? We're going through massive upheaval in our sport. So like the gyms that are too hardcore, they don't do enough technical development, they really skip steps, like they're not going to make it. They really aren't. And so like, it's better to probably jump off that sinking ship while you can.
Yes. Yes. And be part of the wave of change.
Exactly.
I teach kids how to teach coaches how to coach them. Does that make sense? I tell them like, this is how you break through the mental block. Coach doesn't understand. Well, we're going to help them understand. And there's some headbutting. There's some, what, you don't need that sting mat. You don't need a spot. You don't need, why are you on the low beam? But I always say there's 3 weeks of headbutting, and then the coach starts to see the progress. And the coach goes, and get this stupid sting mat. And then I'm like, that's a win. You get the mat. Okay. You're making progress. And then little by little, one gym at a time, one coach at a time, one kid at a time, we are making waves. We're making change.
And the coaches become happier too, right? Because they're not fighting tooth and nail uphill against these like stressful things. It's easier in the long run.
Skills are happening. Who cares how you get there? If it's your way, or if it's, your kid found something on the internet that they want to try.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I do want to end with prefacing kind of what we have working on together. And I do want to say this in advance, is that people who follow Shift know that I'm very guarded against partnerships and sponsorships and stuff like that. Like I try to be very organic with the things we do. But the webinar that we're kind of like teaming up for and trying to help people for is a service that I think that in Shift's world, like we don't really, unfortunately, have a lot of great resources for parents that are really useful in these kind of domains. But also, I, as someone who runs the company, know my limitations. I'm really good at a few things with strength conditioning and medical and stuff like that. Culture, I can talk about that, but I'm not going to be the person to talk about nutrition. I'm not going to be the person to talk about sports psychology and mental blocks, right? Like it's so important to me that I know what I don't know, and I know just enough to be dangerous, right? That's really a problem for me. So whenever somebody talks about nutrition, I'm like, go find these wonderful people that are great. And then whenever someone talks about mental health or mental blocks, there's a bunch of people who I have in my network who I refer to. So I want to preface this with, this is a webinar that I think is beneficial and it's helpful for parents and for gymnasts. It's something that I can't offer, but I know is desperately needed. And I hope that people know it comes from a place of like genuine, wanting to help and nothing marketing, salesy. Like that's not Shift's aim ever, So with that being said, I'm excited to let you kind of share about what we have coming up. Actually, the week this gets released, it will be this week actually. So what's coming up on Sunday of this week?
Yep. So Sunday, what is it? November 5th?
Yeah,
6th?
Sure. 6th.
Yes, we're putting on a free training for parents called How to Help Your Kid, your athlete, your gymnast, overcome a mental block without being too controlling or too involved. So
what a textbookly wonderful name.
So that is what we will offer. You show up, and I'm going to go over some of the big mistakes that parents make in specific, talking about what's actually happening when your athlete is afraid, and kind of letting you off the hook with certain activities, things that you don't have to do anymore because they're not actually helpful. And then kind of helping you figure out like, what is your place? What can you do? And what's the very best, just the best foundation from which to help your child. And this is even if your kid is completely like, doesn't want to talk about it at all, you're going to have some tools so that you'll know exactly how to support your kid in the best way.
Right. So, and I think it's very helpful, right? Because we intentionally wanted to do this early and aggressive because season's coming up soon. Yeah. And it seems that the closer we creep towards routines and towards meet performances and all that kind of stuff, like all these things tend to boil up quite a bit, which is in the summer, you're not worried about it. There's no pressures, but all of a sudden you have to do routines ready for competitions, or you're moving to meets, or you're going whatever. And it seems like this is where all of it boils up. And I get a lot of DMs about like, what can we do with this mental block, or what can we do with this competition anxiety? My daughter just freezes up. My son's having a tough time mentally. So I think it's very timely that I mean, there's no downside to just trying to listen and understand what these tools are, right? Like if you can either register for it, and is there a recording available if they can't come live?
There is. So if the time doesn't work for you live, register anyway, and we'll send out a recording that'll be good for 48 hours. So you can get it on your schedule.
At 12 Eastern, I think we determined, right? On the Sunday.
Yep. 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern.
Fantastic. So they'll learn kind of about how to help their son or daughter through some of these, or I guess be empathetic and know what's going on, but also you'll probably offer quite a bit of useful tools to kind of take it with you through season, correct?
Yes, and I'll take questions. So stick around and I will answer whatever questions you've got. If you've listened to today's episode and you're like, I need to know about this, stick around after, and I'm happy to answer, whatever questions come up and just support, because when I support the parents, I'm supporting the kids. And that is my aim.
Right. Absolutely. And we'll put obviously all the links in the show notes, and we'll have a lot of content around this. But where can people go? I'll put the page up right now, but where can people go to sign up for the webinar, which is free? Yes.
Yeah, it's free. It's free. CompletePerformanceCoaching.com/Dave.
Oh, yeah. It'll do
That
it.
is the place. Yep.
This is
So
it.
you can register there. Yep, it's all set up,
Sounds good.
and just come and get some more nuggets to prepare yourself for what I lovingly call Nervous November.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for the conversation and the input. Again, something I'm aware of and is important, but I don't know exactly the best ways to help. So I try to have people on who can do this. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing all the information, but also putting on the webinar and stuff.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And thanks for waking up early.
You got it.
We made
Only
it,
for
right?
you, Dave.
That was great. All right. Sounds good. We'll put this together and we'll get this out quick.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good. Thank you.